And we are back for the Thousand Worlds Book Club, and we are talking about And 7 Times Never Kill Man. The link for the audio and the written is below. We are joined by Strong Belwas.
I heard there was going to be food. I only came because of the food.
Oh, there's food. I brought some honeyed locusts.
Locusts?
And 7 Times Never Kill Man is a story that hits on so many of the themes that we've already seen in the rest of the Thousand Worlds stories. We have the failure of the chain of command and leaders that we saw in The Hero. We have manipulative dreams from Men of Greywater Station. We have technology posing as magic from Bitterblooms. We have societies going backwards in technology, like in the House of the Worm. We have an intolerant, ever-expanding religion, like in the Soothlam trilogy. We have nature fighting back, like in Guardians. We have conspiracies, like in Call Him Moses, and a mystical draw to involve oneself, like in Starlady.
And we have collective consciousness, like in Night Flyers, Guardians, and Men of Greywater Station.
Absolutely. This being our 15th story, we're beginning to see that George R.R. Martin has some go-to themes. Hive-mindedness is a big one.
Hive-mindedness, like locusts.
Absolutely, and I don't think it's a coincidence that locusts are an informal mascot of our Marine story. Danny believes the Sons of the Harpy are operating collectively, but without a leader, much in the way locusts do. And in And 7 Times Never Kill Man, we hear about the hive-minded races that humanity fought in the Double War, one being the locust-like Findi, and the other being the Harangans, who follow their leaders, the Harangan Minds. Whether the pyramids are the Janshi's leaders, or whether the pyramids just facilitate Janshi collectiveness is fairly irrelevant. The main point is, when they're with their pyramids, they're hive-minded. So in 7 Times Never Kill Man follows our protagonist Necrol, who comes to the planet Korlos to trade with the Janshi. The Janshi are a fairly primitive but peaceful ape-like people. Necrol is convinced that their alien art of their early gods will sell well off-world. However, the Janshi weirdly only ever want salt from Necrol and show no interest in any higher technology. The clans live in balance with nature, foraging for fruit, and killing animal populations when they get too large. The most peculiar thing about the Janshi is each clan worships a pyramid in the middle of their communities as a god. Whatever the pyramids are made of, perhaps plastic, it's well beyond the Janshi's technological ability. Incidentally, the monkeys and pyramids that Victarion finds on the Isle of Cedars is an homage to the Janshi. However, the Janshi are not the only ones on the planet. A group of religious humans known as the Steel Angels are also settling the planet. And unlike the Janshi, they keep expanding, needing more and more farmland. In fact, their religion almost demands warlike expansion. They worship a violent deity called Bacalon, the Pale Child. Bacalon is against beating swords into plowshares. By the way, the Blackfish also preaches this anti-biblical message in A Game of Thrones. And Bacalon himself appears in the House of Black and White and in the dreams of Aaron Damphair. Anyway, as the Steel Angel colony grows, they destroy the Janshi pyramids and either kill the Janshi or send them off into the woods to fend for themselves. Once a Janshi pyramid is broken, the Janshi seem to be unable to work collectively and often end up starving in the woods.
So this is basically the same story as the Children of the Forest and various invaders, right? The children worshipped trees as gods and were close with nature. They even had golden eyes like the Janshi. And then the invading First Men and then Andals came in with their advanced weapons, burned their trees, and were ever expanding.
Yeah, of all of George R. Martin's reused plot lines, this one seems to be the most obvious. So our story begins with the Steel Angels hanging dead Janshi children after removing a Janshi community. Some Janshi actually got violent with the Steel Angels, and Wyatt, the leader of the Steel Angels, wants to warn the other communities. This causes our protagonist Necrol to bitterly hate the Steel Angels, and he begins to visit the Janshi communities and tries to sell them weapons to defend themselves. They don't want any. Meanwhile, with the Steel Angels, Necrol has a mirror character named Dahan. Bald Dahan is the weapons master of the Steel Angels, but he wants them to cease their military activity because he believes the Janshi are no longer a threat to Sword Valley, where the Steel Angels live. Winter is coming, he tells their leader Wyatt, as other important tasks need to be taken care of. Wyatt, though, ignores Dahan and decides he wants to collect Janshi and spread the message that the Steel Angels are superior so that the Janshi will not oppose them when they expand beyond Sword Valley.
That's an interesting parallel. Necrol is the unsuccessful warmonger among pacifists, and Dahan is the unsuccessful peacenik among militarists.
So Necrol, being unsuccessful selling to the Janshi communities, decides to find clanless refugees to form his own resistance group, the first being a female Janshi called the Bitter Speaker. Necrol is not very successful and finds that Janshi without their pyramids don't organize well, they fight all the time, they fuck all the time, and have way too many offspring. He proceeds to ask them about their early gods, the ones they carved, but the Janshi don't know what the fuck Necrol is talking about. Meanwhile, things are not going well for Dahan either. Wyatt, the leader, has been receiving visions that the Janshi will not oppose them as they venture out of Sword Valley. Dahan tries to warn Wyatt of false visions, like those sent by the Harangans and their slave race, the Githyanki, back during the Double War, but Wyatt doesn't listen.
Uh-oh, visions. That sounds like the Children of the Forest as well.
So spring comes and the Steel Angels begin their expansion, and one group of Steel Angels, after destroying a pyramid, comes back with carved statues of Bacalon. The Janshi carved a bunch of Bacalon statues for some reason. Dahan thinks it's a trick since the Necrol may have given them information about Bacalon, but Wyatt reveals that many villages, once Necrol never visited, have been producing them as well. Wyatt declares that this is a miracle, that his visions foretold all of this, and becomes even more devout in his beliefs that his visions are true. Later, word gets out that hundreds of Janshi are collecting near a pyramid. Dahan fears an uprising, so he heads to the pyramid, and Necrol thinks there will be a bloodbath, so his people head that way too. Dahan figures the easy way to have everyone disperse is to destroy the pyramid. But suddenly the pyramid transforms to be translucent, and a statue of Bacalon is inside. Dahan thinks it's a trick, but suddenly the Bitter Speaker becomes possessed and shoots Dahan. Chaos breaks out, and Necrol is killed as well. The Janshi disperse, and the Steel Angels decide to bring back the pyramid to their city. Much later on, Necrol's partner returns to the planet. She finds no reason to trade with the planet anymore, since they now carve Bacalon statues. The Bitter Speaker and the rest of Necrol's resistance group asks to leave the planet with her, and she finds the Steel Angels following the directions of a vision. They are burning their winter stores, believing there will be no winter this year, and they are executing their own children as sacrifices, leaving some to starve to death.
Child sacrifice? I don't feel so good. Still have to finish off this bowl.
So it's worth going back and trying to figure out what exactly went on in the story. Clearly the Janshi Collective, or the pyramids themselves, were sending Wyatt visions that eventually led to the Steel Angels destroying themselves. The pyramids were in fact like Githyanki soul sucks, as Dahan feared. Each pyramid is said to support about 30 Janshi, so I imagine that's how many humans will survive the winter and continue on the planet in perpetuity. It's rather clear that the pyramids are what's keeping the planet in ecological balance. The Janshi refugees start fucking, fighting, and breeding like humans the minute they are away from their pyramids. It does make me wonder if the Janshi weren't originally very advanced or even extraterrestrial and reverted to a primitive nature, as we see the Steel Angels doing. The Janshi may have had gods before the pyramids, but came to worship the pyramids, just as the Steel Angels seem to be transitioning to pyramid worship as well. Or perhaps these earlier gods never existed, but were a ploy to bring in Necrol. Of course, Necrol doesn't actually do very much except arm the Bitter Speaker, who then kills Dahan, so it's hard to say whether those early Janshi carvings were a ploy. The real mystery of the story is who built the pyramids. Perhaps an advanced Janshi society that was plagued by overpopulation like the Suthelmese, or as I said, perhaps the Janshi simply stumbled upon the planet and someone else built the pyramids. Whatever the case, it seems pretty clear that the Janshi regressed. Necrol's partner says as much at story's beginning. So before we talk about the implications of this story on A Song of Ice and Fire, we really have to look at the context of the story. And 7 Times Never Kill Man was published in July of 1975, shortly after the end of the Vietnam War, which our author was greatly against, the hero being a testament to that. Now the title of the story is taken from Rudyard Kipling's The Jungle Book, and yes, thousands of essays have been written about Kipling, arguing the inner meaning of The Jungle Book, but one thing is pretty clear. The Jungle Book is about British colonialism in India. So it seems And 7 Times Never Kill Man is a tale relating the American experience in Vietnam to British colonialism. The jungle-dwelling collectivist Janshi being rough stand-ins for communist Vietnamese. Incidentally, and Seven Times Never Kill Man actually inspired conceptual artists in the creation of the Wookiees. And the Wookiees were originally supposed to be in the Ewoks' place in Return of the Jedi, with the Battle of Endor being Lucas's take on the Vietnam War. However, there is a huge fundamental difference between the Janchi and either the Wookiees or the Ewoks. The Janchi are nominally pacifists. They instead remind us more of Gandhi under British colonialism, especially with the Janchi's affinity for salt. Of course, I say the Janchi are nominally pacifists, but they aren't truly pacifists. The Janchi hold what I refer to as a Kimdissi philosophy. We will talk more about Kimdis when we get to Dying of the Light, but the Kimdissi philosophy is to be nonviolent, but to trick your enemies into killing themselves. Littlefinger, for example, certainly holds the Kimdissi philosophy. Now, a huge aspect of the story is collectiveness. In fact, a prime failure in Wyatt's logic is his inability to see the Janchi's collective nature. He assumes the many carvings of Bacalon a miracle, rather than thinking there's communication between the communities. And the title of the story, And Seven Times Never Kill Man, is a line from The Law of the Jungle, a treatise on the relationship between the wolf and the pack. So what does this tell us about A Song of Ice and Fire? Well, we know that the story of the Steel Angels and the Janchi is pretty close to that of the First Men and the Children of the Forest. The golden-eyed, nature-focused Children of the Forest worshipped their trees as gods. And we know that they were hive-minded and certainly capable of sending visions. And we know that the First Men would destroy trees during their invasion. However, despite seemingly having the upper hand, the First Men suddenly stopped the destruction of the trees and converted. They seem to have taken up the practice of human sacrifice and reverted in technological progress. They can no longer create things like the Wall or Storm's End. Essentially, as with the Janchi and the Steel Angels, a new ecological balance was reached. And I think it's reasonable to wonder if this was achieved through mental manipulation of the First Men. Now that we've seen false prophecy in both Men of Greywater Station and this story, we really have to question whether all of these prophecies and visions have any truth to them. Or are the Children of the Forest just trying to get humanity to kill themselves off? Additionally, George R.R. Martin seems very concerned with sustainability, both politically and environmentally. The religion of the Steel Angels was not sustainable, just as the Soothlomies were not sustainable. We have to ask ourselves, in the mind of George R.R. Martin, is feudalism or even capitalism sustainable? If this story really is about Vietnam, George R.R. Martin is showing some sympathy towards communism. Perhaps the endgame for Westeros is some sort of communal living as well.
Did you just call George R. R. Martin a communist?
Yeah, kind of, or at least he was in the 70s. By the way, you're looking a little green there, Strong Belwas.
Yeah, I'm gonna go take a nap.
So a few other important things to note before we go. This is yet another story that bashes religion. I see it highly unlikely that any religion in Westeros will be deemed illegitimate. It's interesting to note that the moon comes out before the Janchi received their messages. We have seen that the moon is related to communication in Ice and Fire as well. Perhaps the moon is acting like a satellite to bounce messages across the land. At story's end, the bitter speaker seems to take on Nicrole's image as a banner. George R. Martin seems to recognize that there's an innate human desire to want to rally around something, whether it be a god, or a tribe, or a house. And once again, our protagonist perishes. George R. Martin really likes to punish the hero. And that's all for And Seven Times Never Kill Man. Next time we'll be delving even more into religion in The Way of Cross and Dragon. The link for the audio and the written are below. See you then.